The sound of a church bell tolling was the heartbeat of a medieval town, but the hands that pulled those ropes held secrets far deeper than anyone knew. This is the hidden world of the medieval bell ringer. By the end of this journey, you will understand how these solitary figures shaped history from the shadows. We will uncover how they sent coded warnings of plague and invasion using only sound. We will explore the secret guilds that guarded their ancient knowledge. What forgotten story do you think echoes from those silent towers? To become a bell ringer was to answer a call that resonated far beyond the need for a simple occupation. It was a profound commitment, deeply entwined with both faith and civic duty. A person did not simply apply for this role, they were chosen, often from within the quiet discipline of a monastic order. The selection process was intensely rigorous, seeking individuals of unwavering character and physical fortitude. Candidates were observed for their piety, their humility, and their ability to maintain the strict, solitary routine the tower demanded. It was less an interview and more a test of the soul. Upon being chosen, the new bell ringer would take a solemn vow, a pledge of dedication not just to a task, but to a sacred purpose. This vow transformed a job into a lifelong service. The bell ringer's work was seen as a direct form of prayer, his physical effort in pulling the ropes translating into spiritual messages that soared over the rooftops. Every toll marked a sacred hour, structuring the entire community's day around moments of reflection and worship. The sound called the faithful to prayer, comforted the grieving, and celebrated the joyous. It was his responsibility to weave the fabric of time itself for the town, using sound as his thread. This was not a duty performed for recognition, but a silent offering, a way to serve both God and neighbor through the powerful language of the bell. His day began in the deepest dark, long before the sun even considered the horizon. The first call was matins, a solemn tolling that fractured the silence of a sleeping world. Wrapped in a heavy cloak against the tower's chill, he would climb the worn stone steps, his path lit only by a single, guttering candle. His muscles, still stiff from sleep, would protest the first heavy pull on the great rope. The bell's voice, deep and resonant, was not a gentle wake-up call but a spiritual summons, a reminder of the divine order that governed all things. As the sky lightened to gray, the cycle continued with lauds, greeting the new day, then prime, marking the first hour of work. His entire existence was structured by this sacred schedule, a relentless rhythm known as the canonical hours. Each service, from terce in the mid-morning to sext at noon and none in the afternoon, required his presence and his strength. The physical demand was immense. Imagine the strain on his arms, his back, his shoulders, pulling the massive ropes day after day, year after year. His hands became tough and calloused, his body a testament to endurance. But the true challenge was not just the labor, it was the precision. A bell rung a moment too early or too late disrupted the entire town's sacred rhythm. His timing had to be perfect, an unerring human clock. Between these calls to prayer, the tower became his world. In those long stretches of solitude, with only the wind and the cooing of doves for company, he was a spectator to the life unfolding below. He watched the market stalls open, saw children playing in the square, observed farmers returning from the fields. This unique vantage point fostered a deep, contemplative silence. He was both a part of the community and set apart from it, a solitary figure weaving the soundtrack to their lives. As dusk settled, vespers would ring out, a beautiful, melancholy sound that signaled the day's end. And finally, with the night fully descended, came Compline, the last prayer before sleep. The final toll was a release, a gentle closing of the day's spiritual chapter. He would descend the stairs in darkness, his duty complete, his body weary, but his role in the divine tapestry fulfilled once more. High above the bustling streets, the bell tower was a world of wood, rope, and stone. It was a machine built for a single, thunderous purpose. The climb itself was a journey, a winding ascent up narrow, spiraling stairs worn smooth by generations of dedicated feet. The air grew colder with every step, thick with the scent of aged timber and dust. At the summit lay the belfry, an open chamber where the true giants slept. Here, the bells hung from colossal oak beams so massive they seemed to have been hewn from ancient forest kings. Each bell was a masterpiece of cast bronze, its surface etched with prayers and symbols, waiting to give voice to them. But these giants did not speak on their own. They were animated by an intricate web of ropes and wheels, a system of pulleys and levers that transformed a single person's pull into a town-shaking peal. The ropes, thick as a man's wrist and coarse to the touch, descended through holes in the floor to the ringing room below. This is where the bell ringer stood, often unable to see the bell itself, working purely by touch, by rhythm, and by the feel of the rope in his hands. He operated the lungs of the entire community. The architecture was a brilliant acoustic amplifier. The open arches of the belfry were not just for views. They were designed to project the sound waves outward, sending them rolling across rooftops, over fields, and deep into the surrounding countryside. The tower's immense height ensured that no building, no hill, could block its voice. In an age before any form of mass communication, this was the town's central nervous system, and the bell ringer was the one who made it speak. His solitary actions in that stone room created a shared experience for everyone within earshot, uniting them under a single, audible sky. Every note he produced was shaped and launched by the very stones that surrounded him. But those bells were more than just a clock or a call to prayer. They spoke a secret language, a coded system of signals understood only by those trained to listen. The rhythm, the speed, and the number of tolls transformed simple sound into a sophisticated messaging system. A rapid, frantic pealing from the highest, smallest bell was not a call to mass. It was a cry of fire, sending villagers scrambling with buckets toward the smoke. A deep, slow, and solemn toll from the largest bell, repeated at measured intervals, could mean a respected elder had passed from this world into the next. The patterns were precise and deliberate. 3 strikes, a pause, then 2 more might signal that the town council was gathering for an urgent meeting. 4 rapid rings could be a warning that the king's tax collectors had been spotted on the road, giving people time to prepare or perhaps to hide their valuables. The most chilling signal of all was the alarm for an approaching army. This was not a single bell, but a discordant, chaotic clangor from every bell in the tower. A wave of sound meant to paralyze with fear and send farmers fleeing from their fields to the safety of the town walls. This complex language was the bell ringer's primary mystery, the guarded knowledge of his guild. He was the town's first and most crucial news broadcaster, translating urgent events into a symphony of signals. Imagine hearing that specific sequence of rings and knowing, with absolute certainty, that the plague had entered a neighboring village, that a quarantine was now in effect, and that all travel had ceased. This information, delivered in seconds, could save countless lives. The bell ringer held that power in his hands every single day. He was the keeper of a silent code, a man who could shape the fate of his community with nothing but a rope and the resonant voice of bronze. This secret language was not something a person could learn on their own. It was protected by a hidden world of its own, the Bell Ringers Guild. These organizations were far more than simple trade unions. They were secret societies, shrouded in mystery and bound by solemn oaths. To the outside world, they appeared as a fraternity of craftsmen, but within their closed circles, they guarded ancient knowledge that gave them immense, quiet power over the flow of information in a medieval town. Their existence ensured that the vital language of the bells remained pure and uncorrupted. A man could not simply walk into a guild hall and ask to become a bell ringer. He had to be sponsored by a master, his character and lineage scrutinized for generations. The selection process was a test of loyalty and discretion above all else. Once a candidate was deemed worthy, he faced a secretive initiation rite, conducted away from prying eyes, often in the bell tower itself under the cover of night. There, he would swear a sacred oath of silence, vowing never to reveal the guild's methods or the coded meanings of the peals to any outsider. This oath was the foundation of their power. The knowledge of bell ringing was not written down in any book. It was passed from master to apprentice through oral tradition alone. An apprentice would spend years at his master's side, learning the feel of the ropes, the subtle differences in each bell's voice, and the complex sequences for every possible event. He learned the ring for a royal birth, the toll for a bad harvest, and the alarm for a river flooding its banks. This was a living library of sound, memorized and perfected through practice. By controlling this knowledge, the guild controlled who could become a bell ringer. This was not just about protecting a job. It was about ensuring that only the most trustworthy, vetted individuals held the power to shape public thought and action. A rogue bell ringer could spread panic with a false fire alarm or leave a town vulnerable by failing to sound an invasion warning. The guild's strict control was, in its own way, a public service. Their influence extended beyond the ropes. Because they were the first to know of every emergency and every important announcement, guild masters often held the ears of town mayors and church bishops. Their counsel was sought in times of crisis. They knew the town's secrets before anyone else did. This position gave them a form of soft power, a behind-the-scenes influence that shaped decisions without their names ever appearing in official records. They were the silent guardians of order, their authority resonating with every strike of the bell. The bell ringer's tools were an extension of his own body, each one vital for controlling the awesome power of the bells. The most immediate was the rope itself, a thick, rough-hewn cord of braided hemp as thick as a man's wrist. Its coarse fibers bit into his calloused palms with every pull, the friction a constant reminder of the physical bond between man and machine. This was no simple string. It was a living connection, transmitting the bell's immense weight and momentum directly into his hands. He learned to read the rope's tension like a language, feeling the precise moment the bell reached its peak and began its descent. High above him, connected to this rope, was the massive wooden wheel. This was the true engine of the bell, a great spoked circle of oak, often taller than the man himself. As the ringer pulled the rope, the wheel spun, its circumference allowing for a smooth, controlled arc that turned the tons of bronze. The groan of the wooden axle and the steady whir of the rotating wheel were the private sounds of his labor, a mechanical symphony heard only in the ringing room. Yet this entire system produced a sound that was physically punishing. The peal of a large bell, especially within the stone confines of the tower, was a tangible force, a pressure wave that could shake the very floor. To protect himself from a lifetime of deafness, the bell ringer used primitive but crucial ear protection. He would often stuff his ears with soft wool or wax, creating a barrier against the overwhelming noise that would otherwise destroy his hearing over years of service. This daily exposure was an occupational hazard he had to actively manage. The maintenance of this equipment was a relentless, sacred duty. A fraying rope or a cracked wheel spoke not of simple wear and tear, but of impending catastrophe. If a rope snapped under the immense strain, the bell would fall silent, stuck in a useless position, and the recoil could whip the broken end with lethal force across the ringing room. A splintering wheel could seize, sending shockwaves through the entire frame and risking a catastrophic collapse. His life, and the voice of his community, depended on the integrity of these simple, sturdy tools. Every knot was checked, every inch of rope examined for weakness, every joint in the wooden frame tested for stability. His vigilance was the thin line between sacred order and chaotic, deadly silence. The bell ringer's body was his most essential tool, and it paid a heavy price for its service. Controlling a swinging bell weighing hundreds, sometimes thousands of pounds, demanded more than simple muscle. It required a specific kind of brute strength, a powerful, rooted force to counter the bell's own immense momentum. A single miscue, a moment of lost focus, and the rope could whip him off his feet, dragging him violently toward the ceiling. His shoulders and back bore the constant strain, developing thick layers of muscle not for show, but for survival. Yet strength alone was not enough. The most demanding ceremonies, like a royal wedding or a great religious feast, required hours of non-stop ringing. This was a test of pure cardiovascular endurance. His heart would pound in his chest, his lungs burning for air, sweat stinging his eyes as he maintained the complex, rhythmic patterns. It was a marathon run in a small, stone room, a relentless physical exertion that left him utterly drained. Historical records from monastic infirmaries tell silent stories of this toll. They speak of bell ringers plagued by chronic hernias from the constant, heavy lifting. They describe shoulders dislocated by a sudden, unexpected jerk of the rope, and knees ruined by a lifetime of climbing the tower's steep, winding stairs. But the most universal and inescapable injury was to his ears. The deafening clangor inside the stone chamber was a physical assault, a pressure wave that vibrated through his entire skeleton. While he might stuff his ears with wool, it offered little true protection against such overwhelming force. Nearly every career bell ringer suffered permanent hearing damage. They lived in a world of perpetual, high-pitched ringing, a condition we now call tinnitus, where the ghost of the bell's peal never truly left them. They went to their graves in a muffled silence of their own making, their bodies a living testament to the brutal, physical cost of weaving the town's soundtrack. Yet the bell's voice was not reserved for prayer alone. Its secular power echoed through the marketplace and the town square, shaping the rhythm of daily life. While the monastery bell called souls to contemplation, the civic bell in the town hall tower commanded action and order. A different kind of bell ringer answered this call, a man employed by the town council, his loyalties tied to civic authority rather than a religious order. His schedule was dictated by commerce and law. Each morning, a specific peal signaled the official opening of the market, granting vendors the right to sell their goods. A different ring marked the day's end, sending people home and ordering the streets cleared. And when dusk deepened, the haunting sound of the curfew bell rolled out, a command for all citizens to extinguish their hearth fires and retreat indoors, a measure for both safety and control. These civic ringers were the amplifiers for the town criers. When a crier stood in the square to shout a royal proclamation or a new local tax, the bell ringer above would first sound a special sequence, a call for everyone to stop and listen. His bell gathered the crowd, ensuring the mayor's words or the king's decree reached the maximum number of ears. This partnership between voice and bell was the era's public address system. Perhaps the most solemn and grim of his duties was the tolling for public executions. On those dark mornings, the bell did not peal, but sounded a single, slow, and mournful strike, over and over, its somber tone casting a pall over the entire community. It was a sound that spoke of mortality and the harsh price of crime, a reminder of the civic power that held the power of life and death. Because his role was rooted in the secular world, this bell ringer was often privy to different secrets than his monastic counterpart. He knew of tax decisions before they were announced, heard whispers of political intrigue from council members, and understood the true reasons behind sudden curfews or musters of the town guard. His silence was purchased not by a sacred vow, but by a town salary and the threat of dismissal or worse. This created a complex web of loyalties, where the man controlling the town's most powerful voice navigated the treacherous currents of civic politics, holding his own quiet influence over the flow of public information. The bell ringer was the town's original timekeeper, his work creating the first shared clock everyone could hear. Before the pocket watch, before the factory whistle, his bell defined the very structure of daily life. This was a revolutionary power, the invention of public time. His tolling for the canonical hours did more than call monks to prayer. It synchronized the entire community. The bell for prime told the baker his ovens should be hot. The ring for sext signaled to field hands that the midday meal was ready, and the sound of vespers sent merchants closing their ledgers for the day. His rhythm became their rhythm, a collective heartbeat imposed from the heights of the tower. This standardization created an unprecedented social order. A farmer in a distant field and a blacksmith at his forge in the town square were united by the same audible signal, their separate labors harmonized by the bell. It told the apprentice when his long day was legally over, and it told the housewife when to begin preparing the evening meal. This control over time granted the bell ringer a subtle but profound authority. He held the power to hurry a town or slow it down, his strict adherence to the sun's passage creating a reliable framework for all human activity. Think of the quiet influence this gave him. If he rang the market opening bell even a few minutes late, it could disrupt the entire flow of commerce, leaving cartloads of produce waiting outside the gates. If he sounded the curfew too early, it could cut short a vital town meeting or a family's evening. His fidelity to the clock was the bedrock of public trust. In an age of sundials and unreliable hourglasses, his bell was the one truth no one could dispute. He literally shaped time, molding the abstract passage of hours into a tangible, shared experience that governed when people worked, ate, prayed, and slept. The bell ringer did not just mark the hours, he built the very cage of time in which the medieval world lived, and he held the only key. That same isolation that fostered contemplation also bred fear. The bell tower, a place of sacred duty by day, transformed into a realm of shadows and whispers after dark. Generations of bell ringers returned to the earth, but some stories insisted their spirits never truly left the ropes they once pulled. There are countless medieval accounts of bells ringing by themselves on quiet, windless nights. A single mournful toll would echo from a dark and empty tower, sending shivers through anyone who heard it. Villagers would lock their doors, whispering that it was the ghost of a former ringer, forever bound to his post. These phantom peals were often blamed on a ringer who had died suddenly, before he could complete some vital task or pass on a crucial piece of the bell's secret language. His restless spirit was said to be trying to finish his work from beyond the grave. Other tales spoke of full-bodied apparitions. A new apprentice, climbing the stairs for his first solitary vigil, might see the faint, translucent figure of an old man in a monk's robe, his hands moving over ropes that were no longer there. These ghosts were rarely described as threatening. Instead, they were spectral guardians, forever watching over their domain, perhaps ensuring the new generation upheld the sacred traditions. The eerie atmosphere was amplified by the tower's strange acoustics. Wind whistling through the belfry arches could create haunting, melodic sounds, as if the tower itself were humming. Shifting stones and creaking timbers in the night produced noises that sounded like footsteps on the stairs. To a mind steeped in medieval superstition, these natural sounds were proof of a supernatural presence. The bell ringer, alone in that stone pillar, was the sole witness to these mysteries. He lived with these stories, feeling the weight of all the men who had stood in his place before him. Every unexplained draft of cold air, every groan from the old wood, could be dismissed as the building settling, or it could be interpreted as a message from the past. This constant, low-level dread was part of the job's hidden toll. It forged a unique kind of courage, a steady nerve needed to pull the ropes in the pitch black, with only the stories of the dead for company. The line between holy duty and haunted ground was often as thin as a moonbeam cutting through the belfry. The plague years stripped the bell's voice of all its sacred music, leaving only a single, terrible note. Where once the bells had marked the joyful rhythms of life, they now told an endless, monotonous dirge for the dead. The sound became a constant presence, a wave of dread that rolled over the town with grim regularity. There was no time for the usual sequences or coded messages, only the slow, heavy, soul-crushing strike of the largest bell, counting the departed one by one. This was the soundtrack of a community unraveling, a mournful metronome keeping time for the carts that piled bodies high in the streets. The bell ringer, high in his tower, was the architect of this terrifying score. He was the one who gave sound to the town's collective grief and fear, his hands pulling the rope for neighbors, for friends, for people he had watched from his perch for years. The emotional toll of this work was unimaginable. Each pull of the rope was a confirmation of another life lost, another family shattered. He lived in the eye of the storm, surrounded by death, but forced to maintain a dreadful, rhythmic calm. His tower, once a place of contemplation, became a prison overlooking a graveyard. The air itself grew thick with the smell of decay, and the smoke of burning plague tainted belongings, a stench that crept even into the highest belfry. And through it all, his bell had to ring. He could not stop, for the ritual of marking a death was one of the last fragments of order holding the town together. In this atmosphere of absolute terror, dark rumors began to fester. People whispered that the bell ringers, often among the last to die because of their isolated existence, were not the tragic heroes they appeared to be. It was said that some, armed with the knowledge of which houses had been completely emptied by the plague, would descend from their towers under cover of night. They would slip into silent, abandoned homes to loot valuables from the dead, their unique position giving them a macabre map of opportunity. Other rumors suggested a more complex betrayal. Could a bell ringer, privy to every secret in town, use his power to send covert signals? A particular pattern of rings, meaningless to most, might warn certain wealthy families of an approaching quarantine patrol, giving them time to hide their health and avoid being boarded inside their own infected homes. Or perhaps the bells signaled which streets were considered safe zones, information sold for a high price to those desperate to escape the sickness. There was no proof, of course, only the fearful speculation of a society broken by pestilence. Whether these stories were true or merely the inventions of traumatized minds, they reveal a profound truth. In the face of an invisible, unstoppable enemy, even the most trusted figures became objects of suspicion. The man who controlled the town's voice was now suspected of whispering lies, his sacred duty corrupted by the very despair his bells chronicled. The ringing that had once unified the community now sowed the seeds of paranoia, leaving everyone to wonder if the sound they heard was a prayer for the dead or a secret code for the living. Beyond the simple tolling for prayer or alarm lay a profound intellectual art, a form of music built not on melody, but on pure mathematical order. This was the world of change ringing, a discipline that transformed the bell tower into a living calculator. The goal was not to play a tune in the traditional sense, but to ring a set of bells, perhaps 6 or 8, in every possible sequence without ever repeating a single pattern. Each bell had its own fixed note, from the deep-throated tenor to the high, clear treble, and the ringers worked together to cycle through every conceivable arrangement. This created a cascade of sound that was both complex and perfectly logical, a river of permutations flowing in a predetermined, elegant course. The sequence for just 6 bells, for instance, required exactly 720 unique changes before the cycle could begin again. This was a performance that could last for hours, demanding absolute focus and physical endurance from every member of the team. It was a mental marathon as much as a physical one. Each ringer was responsible for tracking the position of his own bell within the ever-shifting pattern, his mind constantly calculating the next move, his hands responding with precise, timed pulls on the rope. A single mistake by one person would break the entire mathematical chain, forcing the group to stop and reset. This was not a skill learned by ear, but through the memorization of complex blueprints called methods. These were intricate maps of motion, diagrams that showed each bell's path through the evolving sequence. The ringers had to internalize these patterns until they became as natural as breathing. Can you picture the concentration required, standing in a circle, each man listening not for a melody, but for the intricate logic of the order, his own actions a single variable in a grand, audible equation? This practice revealed a stunning truth about the medieval bell ringer. He was not merely a laborer or a simple monk. He was a master of a sophisticated craft, a mathematician of sound whose canvas was the air itself, and whose tools were tons of bronze and braided hemp. His work proved that the same mind that could contemplate the divine could also find beauty in the perfect, endless dance of numbers, all expressed through the resonant voice of the bell. Perched at the highest point for miles, the bell ringer was the town's first pair of eyes. His role as a lookout was as critical as his duty with the ropes, turning the belfry into a watchtower that scanned the horizon for any sign of danger or change. While the townspeople below were busy with their daily lives, their vision limited by streets and buildings, he had a panoramic view of the entire world they depended on. He watched the roads winding into the distance, the forests at the edge of cleared land, and the rivers that brought trade and travelers. His elevated position made him an irreplaceable sentinel. A faint, distant plume of smoke on the horizon was not just a fire to him, it was a specific message. He learned to read the color and density of the smoke, distinguishing between a controlled brush fire and the thick, black column that meant a thatched roof was ablaze. He was the first to know, and his hands would fly to the ropes, sounding the frantic fire alarm that sent bucket brigades rushing in the right direction before the town below even knew there was a threat. The same was true for approaching armies. Long before anyone on the ground could hear the rumble of hooves or see the glint of spear tips, he would spot the slow-moving dust cloud rising from the road. He would see the organized, dark mass of soldiers moving across the landscape, their numbers and direction giving the town precious minutes, sometimes even hours, to prepare its defenses. He would then ring the discordant invasion alarm, a sound that transformed peaceful streets into a fortress under mobilization, shutting gates and calling militia to the walls. For coastal towns, his gaze was fixed on the sea. He could identify returning fishing fleets by the cut of their sails, but more importantly, he was the first to spot the distinctive shapes of valuable merchant ships, or, conversely, the dreaded silhouettes of pirate vessels. This early intelligence was a form of power. The information he gathered was not just shouted down to the streets, it was often delivered directly and quietly to those in command. A swift, discreet message would be sent to the bishop or the mayor, informing them of an approaching noble's retinue, a potential trading opportunity, or a looming threat. This gave the leadership a crucial head start, allowing them to prepare a welcome, a negotiation, or a defense. The bell ringer was more than a watcher. He was a vital nerve center. His eyes in the sky and his hands on the ropes made him the linchpin in a system of survival, a solitary figure whose vigilance quite literally determined the fate of everyone who lived within the sound of his bell. The bells were a public instrument, yet their language held the potential for private whispers, a seemingly ordinary sequence of tolls, one that sounded like a simple call to vespers or the marking of a merchant's arrival, could in fact be a covert signal for a very different kind of gathering. Heretical groups, meeting in defiance of the church, might rely on a specific, subtle pattern from the bell tower to confirm the coast was clear. A single strike from the smallest bell, 5 minutes after the main evening prayer, could mean the secret cellar door was unguarded and the meeting could begin. For political dissidents plotting against a corrupt town official, the bells were their secure communication network. The standard alarm for a town council meeting might be altered slightly, perhaps with an extra, almost imperceptible pause between two of the strikes, warning their members that the meeting was compromised and they should stay away. Even the most intimate of secrets found a voice through the bells. Two star-crossed lovers, kept apart by their families, could arrange their clandestine meetings based on the sound from the tower. A rapid, joyful peal from the middle bell, rung at a time when no service was scheduled, might be their signal to steal away into the moonlit forest. The bell ringer himself was the keeper of these conspiracies. His unique control over the town's auditory landscape made him the perfect accomplice. He could weave these secret codes into the fabric of daily life, hiding messages in plain sound. Imagine the trust required, the danger involved. A dissident would have to approach the bell ringer, offering coin or perhaps a shared grievance, to enlist his help. The ringer would then hold two sets of knowledge in his mind, the public meaning of the bells and the hidden one, his hands pulling the ropes for God and country, while his heart might be pulling them for rebellion or for love. This duality placed him in a precarious position. If a suspicious priest or mayor ever detected the pattern, if they realized the bells were speaking a second, unsanctioned language, the consequences would be severe. The bell ringer would face charges of heresy or treason, his life forfeit for manipulating the very voice of authority. His tower, a symbol of order, could become the central node in a silent rebellion, all because he knew how to make the bells tell a story only a chosen few could hear. The path to mastery began not with a rope, but with a broom. An apprentice's first years were spent in silent observation, sweeping the ringing room floor and watching the master's work. He learned the tower's unique personality, the way the wind sang through its arches, and how the morning light struck the bells. Every task was a test of his patience and his commitment to the guild's secretive world. His true education was in the language of touch and sound. Before he was ever allowed to pull a great bell, he would practice for months on a silent, weighted rope, a dummy bell that taught his muscles the rhythm and resistance without making a sound. He learned the feel of the rope as it became a live thing in his hands, the precise moment of the bell's swing, and the dangerous kickback if his timing was wrong. This was a skill learned through the body, a physical memory that had to be perfect. Only when he could ring the dummy with flawless consistency would he be permitted to sound a real bell, and even then, it was the smallest and lightest one, its tone a mere whisper compared to the giants above. The memorization required was immense. There were no written manuals, no diagrams he could study alone. All the knowledge was passed from the master's mouth to the apprentice's ear. He had to commit to memory hundreds of different ringing sequences, each one a code for a specific event. He learned the 3-2 pattern for a council meeting, the 4 rapid strikes for a tax collector's arrival, and the complex, chaotic peal that meant enemy soldiers were sighted. He practiced these patterns on the silent rope until they were as natural as his own heartbeat, his lips moving silently as he recited the sequences. The most solemn moment of his training was the oath of secrecy. This was not a simple promise. It was a sacred vow administered in the hushed silence of the tower, often by candlelight. He swore on the bells themselves never to reveal the guild's methods or the hidden meanings of the peals to any outsider. This oath bound him to the fraternity for life, transforming him from an outsider into a guardian of the town's most vital secrets. His training was a process of absorption, of slowly becoming part of the tower itself, until the ropes felt like his own nerves and the bells spoke with his own voice. No character has captured the lonely mystique of the bell ringer more than Quasimodo, the fictional hunchback of Notre Dame. Victor Hugo's tragic hero, isolated in his stone tower with his beloved bells, became the ultimate symbol of the role for millions. He was a figure of immense physical strength and profound devotion, his heart beating in time with the great bronze bells he cared for. Through Quasimodo, the world saw the bell ringer not as a simple laborer, but as a soul wedded to his tower, a misunderstood guardian of both the sacred and the profane. His deafness, a result of a lifetime surrounded by thunderous peals, mirrored the real hearing loss suffered by historical ringers. Yet in his case, it became a powerful metaphor for his separation from the society below. This fictional portrayal, while deeply romantic, cemented an image in the popular mind that blended the lines between the sacred duty of the real ringers and the dramatic pathos of a Gothic hero. Yet history offers its own compelling figures, men whose stories are just as strange. One such legend tells of a bell ringer in the city of Ghent during the 1600s, known only as Blind Jan. As his name suggests, he was completely without sight, yet he was said to possess an almost supernatural ability to ring the most complex changes. He could not see the ropes, relying entirely on touch and the subtle vibrations in the floor to know the position of each swinging bell. His story, whether entirely true or embellished by time, speaks to the deep, intuitive knowledge that defined a true master of the craft. He did not need eyes when his entire body was an instrument of the bells. Another tale, from a small English village, recounts the fate of a ringer named Thomas of Evesham. The story goes that during a violent storm in the 1400s, lightning struck the tower just as Thomas was ringing the Vespers bell. The shock was said to have fused the bell rope to his hands, and he was found lifeless, still clinging to his duty. Such stories, passed down through generations, were not just ghost stories. They were a way for communities to process the strange, dangerous, and almost magical nature of the bell ringer's work. These men, both real and imagined, lived between the earth and the heavens. They were seen as touched by the divine, or perhaps cursed by it, their fates intertwined with the powerful objects they commanded. Through their legends, the bell ringer entered our collective imagination not as a mere timekeeper, but as a permanent resident of the threshold, a man whose life was a secret conversation between the human world and the sky. His daily sustenance was as humble as his cell. The bell ringer's meals were simple, hearty affairs, designed to fuel the immense physical labor of his day, not to delight his palate. His diet was often provided by the monastery or the town council as part of his stipend, consisting of coarse dark bread, thick pottage made from peas and barley, and the occasional piece of salted fish or hard cheese. Fresh meat was a rare luxury, perhaps enjoyed on a major feast day, but his regular fare was monotonous and practical. He ate alone, usually in a small chamber within the tower's base, his only company the lingering echo of his last peal. His drinking water was drawn from the church well, and he might have a modest allowance of weak ale to break the monotony. This was not a life of culinary enjoyment, but one of sustenance, where food was mere fuel for the body that served the bell. His home was his workplace. Many bell ringers, especially those in monastic service, slept in a small, Spartan room built directly into the tower's structure. It was a cell in the truest sense, containing little more than a straw-filled pallet on a wooden frame, a small table for his candle, and a chest for his few personal belongings. A single narrow window offered a sliver of the world he observed, but rarely joined. The air was perpetually cool and carried the faint, metallic scent of the bells. He went to sleep and woke to the sound of his own tolling, his life rhythms dictated by the very instrument that defined his existence. This profound isolation forged peculiar habits. He might talk to the bells, giving them names and attributing to them distinct personalities. The tenor bell was a grumbling old man, the treble a lively youth. He could develop small, superstitious rituals, like touching a specific stone on the spiral staircase for luck before a long change-ringing session. His sense of time became internalized, his body so attuned to the canonical hours that he might wake moments before his candle was needed to climb the stairs for matins. Socially, he occupied a strange and lonely tier. He was deeply respected by the community, seen as a vital, almost sacred functionary. Parents would point him out to their children as a man of importance. Yet this respect created a barrier. He was not a man to share a drink with at the tavern or to joke with in the marketplace. His perpetual proximity to the divine, his knowledge of every birth and death before anyone else, set him apart. People sought his blessings, not his friendship. His social interactions were largely transactional and brief, receiving his food, hearing a piece of news to be rung, or accepting a whispered request for a special toll. He was a respected ghost, a man everyone knew but no one truly knew, living a life of necessary solitude high above the crowd, his heart as isolated as his chamber. The silence was more terrifying than any alarm. When the bells fell silent, the entire town lost its rhythm, its voice, its very sense of time. This sudden quiet was never an accident, it was a profound and deliberate punishment. A king or local lord, enraged by a town's defiance or failure to pay taxes, might order the bell tower seized and the ropes cut. His soldiers would stand guard to ensure no sound could be made, imposing a civic muteness that was meant to break the community's spirit. Without the bells, the market could not officially open, the curfew could not be enforced, and the day dissolved into a confusing, unstructured haze. People would wander the streets, looking anxiously toward the tower, feeling a deep, primal disorientation. The most severe form of this punishment came from Rome itself. If a pope placed a town or an entire kingdom under an interdict, every church bell was silenced. This was a spiritual catastrophe. No call to mass rang out, no joyous peal celebrated a wedding, no solemn toll marked a passing. The silence was a message from God that the community was cut off from divine grace, and the fear this instilled was more powerful than any army. The absence of the death knell was particularly haunting. When a loved one died, the family had to bury them in quiet, unhallowed ground, without the comforting ritual of the bell to guide the soul to rest. This collective punishment through silence showed everyone just how fragile their ordered world truly was. But what if the bell ringer himself was the source of the defiance? A ringer who refused to sound an alarm for a corrupt mayor's fabricated emergency, or one who would not toll for an unjust execution, held immense power in his silence. He could, with a simple act of non-cooperation, bring the machinery of authority to a grinding halt. The consequences for him were dire. He would face immediate imprisonment, his sacred vows broken by the secular power he defied. His guild would disown him to protect its own standing, leaving him utterly alone. In some recorded cases, a defiant bell ringer had his hands broken so he could never pull a rope again, a brutal and symbolic end to his life's purpose. His protest was a solitary, desperate act, a gamble that the community's confusion would turn to support. Sometimes it worked, sparking a rebellion that overthrew a tyrant. More often, it ended with a new man in the tower and a lesson taught about the limits of a ringer's power. The true lesson of the silence was not about the bell ringer, but about the people below. Their palpable anxiety when the bells stopped revealed an incredible truth. They had outsourced their own sense of time, their community coordination, and their spiritual connection to the man in the tower. They had forgotten how to listen for the wind, how to read the sun's position, how to organize themselves without that external voice. The silence exposed a deep dependency, proving that the bell's greatest power was not in its sound, but in the void it left behind. The bell's voice was not born in the tower, but forged in fire. Its creation was a dangerous alchemy. a process shrouded in as much mystery as the ringing itself. Deep within a smoky foundry, artisans known as founders performed a sacred craft, transforming raw earth and metal into an instrument capable of speaking to an entire town. The recipe was a closely guarded secret, a specific alloy of copper and tin known as bell metal. The proportions were critical, a balance struck not just for strength, but for the purity of sound. Too much copper and the bell's tone would be dull and lifeless. Too much tin and it would become brittle, risking a catastrophic crack during its first mighty swing. Once the metals were carefully weighed, they were fed into a roaring furnace, melting into a seething, molten river of glowing orange. The heat was immense, a physical force that pushed everyone back, their faces gleaming with sweat in the hellish light. Meanwhile, other craftsmen built the bell's form from nothing but clay and horsehair. They sculpted a core, a solid brick shape representing the bell's interior void, and then a cope, an outer mold that defined its majestic curves and inscriptions. This was slow, patient work, with each layer of clay needing to dry perfectly before the next could be applied. The moment of truth was the casting. The founder would give the signal, and the furnace was tapped. That river of liquid metal, brighter than the sun, would pour into the narrow gap between the core and the cope. It was a breathtaking and terrifying spectacle, a single mistake away from a deadly explosion of steam and molten bronze if any moisture remained in the clay. After the metal cooled for days, the mold was broken away, revealing the rough, dark form of the bell, but it was silent. Its voice had to be awakened. This was the final magic, the tuning. The founder would suspend the bell and, with a small, precise hammer, tap its inner surface at specific points. With each careful strike, he shaved away infinitesimal amounts of metal, listening intently as the bell's fundamental note emerged and the dissonant harmonics fell away. This was an art of the ear, a delicate dance between hammer and bronze that could not be rushed. A single miscalculated strike could throw the entire bell out of tune, rendering months of work useless. For the bell ringer, this origin story was everything. He knew his bell not as an object, but as a personality with a soul forged in that fire. He learned its unique voice, the slight rasp in the tenor bell, the clear, almost laughing tone of the treble. He knew which bell was stubborn to start swinging, and which one rang with a pure, unwavering note. His relationship was one of deep respect, even reverence. When he pulled the rope, he was not just operating a machine. He was conversing with a partner whose creation was as miraculous as the messages it would carry for 100 years. The bell ringer's solitude was a perfect cradle for secrets, and his literacy made him a chronicler of things never meant for public record. While most townsfolk lived their lives by oral tradition, he possessed the rare and dangerous skill of writing. This ability, combined with his unique vantage point, suggests he may have kept private diaries, but not the kind you would leave on a table. These would be encoded manuscripts, written in ciphers known only to his guild or to himself alone. Imagine the contents. His pages would not just record the weather or his daily tolls. They would hold the true history of the town, seen from above. He might document the secret midnight meetings of nobles in the courtyard, or sketch the arrival of a disguised messenger at the bishop's door. His journal could contain the real cause of a fire that official reports called an accident, or the names of those who profited from a plague quarantine. This was eyewitness testimony from a man everyone forgot was watching. The knowledge of his guild was too precious to be left to memory alone. The complex methods for change ringing, the precise recipes for bell metal, and the full lexicon of the bell's secret signals, all of this would need to be preserved. Yet writing it down plainly was an immense risk. If such a manuscript fell into the wrong hands, any outsider could learn to counterfeit a fire alarm or silence an invasion warning. So, the guild's most vital secrets were likely recorded in code. A simple substitution cipher, where each letter of the alphabet is shifted by a fixed number, would render the text meaningless to a curious soldier or a suspicious priest. Only another initiated bell ringer, holding the key, could decipher the instructions for the 720th change or the meaning of 2 quick strikes, followed by a long pause. Beyond official records, these hidden pages might have held the ringer's own soul. In the long, quiet hours between prayers, what thoughts filled his mind? He might have penned philosophical musings on the nature of time, which he measured out daily, or verses of poetry inspired by the swallows nesting in the belfry. He could have recorded his doubts about the mayor he was ordered to support, or his grief for the countless dead he told for during the plague years. These personal reflections would be the most dangerous of all to put to paper, for they revealed a mind that questioned the very order his bells upheld. To protect these truths, his diaries would be hidden in the most secure place he knew, within the tower itself, a loose stone in the spiral staircase, a hollowed-out space in the great oak beam that held the tenor bell, or a secret compartment in the ringing room floor. These manuscripts were his legacy, a whisper of a life spent between heaven and earth, ensuring that even if his voice was forgotten, his witness would not be entirely lost. That profound isolation sculpted a very particular kind of mind. The bell-ringer's existence was a paradox, for he was the most public of figures while living the most private of lives. His world was one of constant sound and deep silence, a rhythm that could either forge a sage or break a weaker spirit. The endless hours alone in the stone tower, with only the wind and the cooing of doves for company, forced a man inward. Without the daily chatter of the marketplace or the comfort of a family hearth, his own thoughts became his primary companions. This solitude was not an empty void, but a fertile ground for deep contemplation. He had the time and the quiet to ponder the nature of time, which he measured out daily, or to reflect on the cycles of life and death he announced from his perch. Many likely developed a profound, personal relationship with their faith, seeing their work not as a job, but as a continuous prayer woven into the very air of the town. This was the path of the wise hermit, the man whose separation from the world gave him a unique and serene perspective on its follies and joys, yet the same conditions could breed a very different outcome. The relentless, deafening peals of the bells, even with wool stuffed in his ears, took a cruel toll. Over years, the world below would grow muffled, then distant, and finally silent. His own voice might become an awkward, unmodulated shout, as he could no longer hear himself speak. This physical deafness mirrored a growing social deafness, an inability to relate to the ordinary conversations and concerns of the people he watched from above. How could he engage in gossip about the harvest when his ears rang with the aftermath of a divine summons? This sensory deprivation, combined with his extreme isolation, often led to behaviors that the townsfolk viewed as strange or touched. He might be seen talking to the bells, giving them names and personalities. He could develop intricate, superstitious rituals, like touching a specific crack in the stone wall 3 times before a storm to ensure the tower's safety. To the people below, these were the marks of a madman, not a mystic. They would whisper that the bell ringer was odd, that the solitude had addled his wits, that he was more a creature of the tower than a man of the town. So which was he, the wise hermit or the madman in the tower? The truth is, he was likely a bit of both. His life was a balancing act on a high, lonely wire. The same devotion that made him a reliable guardian of the town's rhythm could curdle into obsessive compulsion. The deep contemplation that brought him peace could also spiral into paranoia or delusion. He was a man set apart, and that separation came with a cost, paid in the quiet, strange currency of a mind that lived too long with only its own echoes for company. The bell's voice could turn from a prayer into a weapon with a single pull of the rope. During a siege, the bell tower transformed into a command post, its ringing no longer a call to peace, but a strategic instrument of war. The bell ringer's role shifted from spiritual guide to military signalman, his actions directly influencing the survival of everyone behind the walls. The first sign of an impending attack was not a visible army, but a specific, urgent peal from the highest bell, a sharp, repeating alarm that sent farmers scrambling from their fields and soldiers rushing to man the battlements. This sound gave the town its precious warning, the few extra minutes needed to close the heavy gates and prepare for the assault. Once the enemy was at the gates, the bells communicated the battle's flow to defenders who could not see the entire fight. A rapid, chaotic clangor from every bell in the tower signaled a breach in the walls, directing militia and reserves to the point of greatest danger. A shift to a steady, rhythmic toll from the great tenor bell might mean the breach was being held. a message of resilience meant to bolster morale across the besieged town. The control of the bell tower was therefore a primary military objective for any attacking force. If invaders could scale the walls or force a gate, their first target was often the tower itself. Silencing the bells was as crucial as capturing the town hall. A captured tower meant the defenders lost their centralized voice. They could no longer coordinate a counterattack, call for reinforcements from a different sector, or warn of a new threat. The enemy, in turn, would use the bells for their own purpose, ringing a triumphant, discordant peal to announce their victory and shatter the remaining will of the citizens. For the bell ringer, this was his most dangerous hour. He was a high-value target, trapped in a stone needle that was both a fortress and a trap. He would often ring the invasion alarm until the moment enemy soldiers burst into the ringing room. His final act of defiance might be to cut the ropes, rendering the bells temporarily silent and useless to the new masters of his town. In that moment, the fall of the bells was the true sound of defeat, a silence that echoed with the loss of freedom. That same mathematical art of change ringing still echoes through modern bell towers. The ancient sequences, once used to mark medieval time, are now performed by dedicated societies who preserve the craft with near religious fervor. In churches across England and beyond, teams of ringers gather to practice the same complex methods, their hands pulling the same ropes, their minds solving the same audible puzzles that fascinated their predecessors centuries ago. This is not a reenactment, but a living tradition, a direct line stretching back to the secretive guilds. The language of the bells may have lost its urgency, no longer signaling fires or invasions, but the discipline required to master it remains just as profound. The romantic image of the solitary ringer, however, has been cemented not by history books, but by fiction. Quasimodo's ghost still swings from our collective imagination, his tragic love story and devotion to his bells coloring how we see every figure in a tower. Films and novels continually return to this archetype, portraying the bell ringer as a misunderstood soul, isolated and touched by a strange genius. This poetic vision, while powerful, often overshadows the quieter truth of their historical role. The secretive world of coded messages and guild oaths has largely faded, its mysteries dissolved by the telegraph and the telephone. We no longer need a man in a tower to tell us an army approaches or a loved one has died. Yet the foundational role of the bell ringer endures in a different form. Every time a community gathers for a wedding and hears those joyous peals, or pauses for a moment of remembrance during a toll, they are participating in a ritual of shared sound that he established. He was the original architect of community through synchronized experience, a function that now lives on in our radio broadcasts, our smartphone alerts, and our national anthems. We have simply found new bells to ring. He was a solitary guardian of time, a mathematician of sound, and a keeper of whispers. The medieval bell ringer's life defied any simple definition, woven from strands of sacred duty, civic power, and profound secrecy. He was part musician, translating complex numerical patterns into cascading peals that rolled across the countryside. He was the town's original timekeeper, his tolling hands building the very cage of hours in which society lived. He was its first lookout, his eyes scanning the horizon for the dust of armies or the smoke of fire long before anyone below sensed danger. And he was the master of clandestine codes, his ropes speaking a second, hidden language understood only by a chosen few, from star-crossed lovers to political dissidents. His existence was never mundane. It was a precarious balance at the intersection of faith and community, of public service and private mystery. He lived between heaven and earth, his life a silent conversation with the giants of bronze that were his only true companions. His final toll has long since faded from the air, but the echoes of his secret life still linger. What secrets do you think are still hidden in the silence of old bell towers? Share your theories in the comments below, and subscribe for more journeys into the forgotten corners of